Hello, everyone, and welcome to How to Build a Lifelong Love of Reading. Tonight's speaker is Lauren Robinson, a speech-language pathologist with Morneau-Shepell Children's Support Solutions. My name is Samantha Herberman, and I will be your moderator for this evening. A couple of housekeeping pieces before we get started. In order to participate, please go to the GoToWebinar software on the right-hand side of your screen and click on the box labeled Chat to let us know about any questions that you might have. You can also use the questions box to pose any questions. We will have specific time to answer questions towards the end of the presentation, but if something comes up that you're thinking about any earlier, feel free to let us know through those two options, the chat box or the question box. A little bit about Morneau-Shepell. We help 500,000 people each year through therapy, education, and coaching. Our Children's Support Solutions team helps children reach their potential through an interprofessional and family-centered approach. And a special offer from Morneau-Shepell Children's Support Solutions. Mention that you participated in our webinar this evening when you book an appointment with Children's Support Solutions between now and December 23rd, and we will waive the administrative fee. At the end of our webinar, please visit our website at www.childrensupportsolutions.com or call us at 1-866-653-2397. A little bit about our speaker this evening. Lauren is a registered speech-language pathologist in Ontario and has been working in her role at Morneau-Shepell since October 2013. She attended McGill University, where she received a Bachelor's of Arts in Science and Cognitive Science, and Emerson College in Boston for her master's studies in Communication Sciences and Disorders. Lauren is a voracious reader herself and came to love working with children with dyslexia several years ago. This led her to complete an advanced course at the University of Toronto for speech-language pathologists in literacy intervention in 2015. And now I'll turn it over to Lauren for our objectives for this evening. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our talk tonight. So tonight, I really want you to leave here with a very basic understanding of the development of reading and reading milestones. I think a lot of people are here because maybe they have children that are having difficulty reading. So I want to kind of go over reading and literacy challenges, and then we'll get to the good stuff where some ideas of activities and strategies to bring literacy into everyday activities and prepare your children for reading and supporting acquisition of reading. So tonight's discussion is important because emergent reading skills are the #1 predictor of academic success later in school. And so those emergent reading skills are when we're in kindergarten and our early learning there. And a confidence in reading is really crucial and key for love of reading. So kids love reading because they can explore new worlds, and they don't love reading when it's work and it's really hard. Okay, so let's get started with a very broad outline of reading milestones and development. So when do we start reading? So around 2, children become aware of letters in their environment, and they're starting to realize that books are held a certain way, and they'll choose their favorite books by their cover pages, and you'll often see them pretending how to read. Around 3, children start to know their alphabet, so they're identifying letters, singing the alphabet song, and they'll also start telling and retelling their favorite stories. So while you're reading, they might tell you about it, or they might tell you again afterwards, and they'll also notice while you're reading favorite stories when you change a part of it. So by the end of kindergarten, we start getting more into what we typically refer to as reading. So at this age, they're developing phonological awareness. That's a term I'm going to use a lot tonight. So phonological awareness is the awareness that words are made up of sounds. So cat makes the word cat, and so that there's 3 distinct sounds in that word. So at this stage, they're really good at isolating the first sound of a word. So cow starts with k. So by the end of kindergarten, children are also developing their orthographic awareness or their print awareness. So they're aware that letters are associated with sounds, and when we put those letters together, we get words. So this is also when they start recognizing sight words and recognizing their name. So often words that are very short and very frequent. And by grade 1, children start being able to sound out letters and really start decoding and sounding out words. So they're looking at BAT and they'll say B, at, bat. So the alphabet is, acquiring the alphabet system is a process. And so in North America, children predominantly learn their letter names more than their letter sounds. So some letter names are really obvious what they say. P says P, Z says Z, but others don't. And these are often letters that are harder for kids to learn and know what they sound like W and Y. Because it would make sense for Y to say W, but it doesn't. And some have more than one sound that they say depending on their environment. So vowels sound different. C's can be K and G's can be G or J. So this part of development moves in stages. So we learn that there's a thing called B, and then we recognize that it's a thing that has a straight line down and 2 loops. And then we learn that this letter says B, and then we're able to isolate it. Oh, I can hear that B sound in the word bat. We're also then able to find a B in a word, in a book or a sign. And then we start to learn that these sounds and letters make up the words that we read. And then we can use this understanding to actually sound them out ourselves. So now we move into grades 1 and 2, where the focus on reading acquisition really ramps up in school. So up until grade 4, children are really learning how to read, and the big focus is on that. In grades 1 and 2, kids are able to sound out unfamiliar words, and they're getting better at this skill. So reading moves from sounding out words or using phonological strategies to orthographic knowledge, so we're recognizing a word as a whole. So sight words, I know that is a word because I have seen it a lot. So there's a lot of jargon right in this slide, so I'm going to give you an example right now that will hopefully help you understand what I mean by this process. So I'm going to put up some words that I want you to say out loud at home. So image. That's a word you probably read very quickly because you have that word stored as a whole chunk in your brain. So that when you saw it, you didn't have to sound it out, but the letters I, M, A, G, E are in your brain as one unit, and that's associated with meaning of a picture. So let's move on to the next one. So impossible has twice as many letters as image, but it probably didn't take you twice as long to read it because it's still highly frequent and familiar, and most likely you recognized it as a whole chunk instead of having to sound it out. So moving on. So imminent is shorter than impossible, but you might have been a little bit slower to recognize it or had to sound out the word. So with impecunious, your decoding or phonological skills may be kicking in more now because this word is much less familiar and frequent and longer. Okay, one more. And finally, imperturbability. Once again, your decoding skills were probably triggered again. So you may not have sounded out every sound, but because it has ability in it, you recognize that as a chunk. So once you got to it, you didn't have to sound out the whole thing. But so here, your knowledge of suffixes or finding parts of a word in other words helped you out, and it was a strategy you used. So as you can imagine, the more words you store as a whole and can recognize quickly, the faster you can read and the more fluent you are. So as children become better at decoding and are moving towards this recognizing words as a whole, their fluency of reading increases. With fluency comes comprehension, because if you are sounding out every word at a painstakingly slow pace, you've probably forgotten what you read a couple words earlier because you're spending so much effort sounding out these words. So in grades 1 and 2, you'll see your kids start reading books by themselves and overall understanding more of what they're reading. So moving on to grades 2 and 3, your children are becoming better decoders, so they're using more strategies. They are learning kind of what suffixes are, and they're able to use them to read and recognize more words. Their writing also improves at this time, so you'll see them use punctuation, capitalization, and more correct sentence structure. So in grade 4, a big shift occurs. So this is a huge time in our development. That is a big step. So your child is switching from learning how to read to reading to learn. So they have to learn, from their reading, they have to learn new words and concepts through the text. There are less visuals and picture support, so they're not being able to rely on that information. They're reading a larger variety of text, so it's not just stories, but it's biographies, and it's recipes, and it's experiments. So they need to be making inferences, so they need to be reading between the lines and applying their background knowledge and their own understanding of how the world works to understand really what's going on and also synthesize all of that information. So we also see writing demands increase significantly, and there's a larger focus on independent work. Okay, so that's my very, very short and brief summary of milestones. And so let's keep going. So why do kids hate reading? I mean, I love reading. How could anybody hate reading? So reading is hard. Reading is really, really hard. So as I've been hinting at, there are a lot of steps associated with reading, and this is not an exhaustive pie. So kids have to decode new words using their phonological skills, so sounding out words, and morphological skills, knowing about suffixes and prefixes and how that changes what the word means. They need to read fluently because they need to read fluently to understand and comprehend. They also need to bring in background knowledge to be able to comprehend and understand. They need to have the vocabulary that's in the passage or be able to figure out what the vocabulary is in that passage. They have to synthesize all this information, which means they have to remember it. They have to infer how characters are feeling, what their intentions are behind their actions. And then they still have to remember all of that information and keep going. And so yeah, I'm exhausted just by going through all of that. So this is even harder if you have any difficulty with any or all of those areas, decoding or like visual or auditory memory. So this is a widely used model of reading that shows how intertwined all of the components needed for skilled reading are. So I really like this model because it shows how connected language is with reading. So everything is really connected, and if anything is missing or challenging, then things can start to unravel. So we really need to have that language comprehension, so background knowledge, vocabulary, being able to inference, read between the lines, understanding what the different text structures are on top of word recognition. So being able to sound out letters, being able to sound out words, being able to recognize sight words as well. So a lot of our focus is often on the bottom strand, the word recognition, and when kids are having trouble reading, that's where we focus, but we can't forget about the language comprehension piece, and that's integral for these children. So the top strand is also where we can propel our children that don't have learning challenges to help them become even better readers. So if kids are working at a young age and exposed to more verbal reasoning, why are they doing this, then they will only have advantages as they continue on in school when things become more challenging. So before we start going through the strategies to help support both strands of reading, because I'm going to give you strategies for both, I wanted to briefly go over dyslexia because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what dyslexia is. So what is dyslexia? So this is a very broad definition, but it's a learning-based language disorder. So because reading is so complex, and as I showed you, there's so much involved, it is really not just about reading, it's about language. So it's a cluster of symptoms and characteristics resulting in difficulty reading. So these might include word recognition, decoding or sounding out words, fluency, spelling, writing, so the organization of writing, sentence structure, even using punctuation and capitalization effectively. So some red flags for our younger readers are kids who have difficulty learning the alphabet and letter sounds. They have poor organization while writing. So whether that means they're starting at different areas of the page, or they're mixing up their words, or there's not logical order between sentences. Another red flag is they can't read quick enough to understand. So that's what I was talking about, those really slow decoders, that they're working so hard on every word that they're not getting that fluency, so they aren't comprehending. So I think this is probably a pretty shocking number to people, that up to 15 to 20% of Americans may have dyslexia to some degree. So I don't have any Canadian statistics, but that's a lot of people who have trouble reading. So I think that this is an area that's really undiagnosed and really under-supported. So some risk factors for reading difficulties are in this list below. So the biggest predictor of reading difficulties is actually a family history of difficulty learning how to read or difficulty in school. And other risk factors include children who are late talkers, children who have many articulation or sound errors, children with hearing loss, and children with attention deficit disorder. So not all risk factors lead to reading difficulties, and kids can have reading difficulties without any of these factors. This is not a causal relationship, but we do see a lot of consistencies with these areas. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can support our children and give you some ideas. So this is the fun stuff. Okay, so as I said, reading doesn't start at kindergarten. Reading and loving reading and books, it starts early. And I think the biggest thing we need to remember about reading is it's social. So it really should be highly interactive, really fun, and it should be a social activity. There should be dialogue. There should be shared affect between you and your child. So it really should be something that is not just getting into the story, but getting into everything that goes around it as well. So pick colorful and engaging stories. So with these young ones, they are drawn to these books, and we can encourage them to be more active if they're more interested in the book itself. So this can be really child-led. So let them pick the book. And I know you've read this book over and over and over again, but this is an opportunity to kind of do some other fun things that can get the child involved more in the reading process. So one of these things is called paired reading. So these books that the kid knows off by heart, or you've read a whole bunch of times, or on every page it ends the same way. So the child can fill in this predictable rhyming word or a predictable frequent word in these familiar books. So not by the hair on my chinny chin, and then the kid says chin. Or brown bear, what do you see? I see a purple cat looking at me. So in this way, you're encouraged, you can point out the words to your kids so that you're kind of linking and showing them that when these books, the words on the page are related to the story. So you're linking that to them. Another thing that's very social that we can do with reading is acting them out. So you can have a little theater production of their favorite stories, and really get kids loving stories and loving that the adventure of books early on. And I think something that lots of people probably already do is using different voices. So the sillier the voice, I think the more fun it can be. Okay, so as we move a little further on, we want to support reading acquisition. So the number one thing that we can do to support our early readers is moving past learning the alphabet song. So as cute as it is that kids can sing the alphabet, learning how to read learning the letter sounds is much more important than learning the letter names. You'll see this in, I think, Montessori programs, is that they'll go through and instead of teaching letter names, they teach letter sounds. So they are really, really working on that, linking the print to the sounds and the phonological. So as I said earlier, phonological awareness is the awareness about sounds that make up words, and print awareness, or orthographic awareness, as I referred to it earlier, is knowing what our letters look like, that they say different things, that uppercase and lowercase are the same thing, different fonts are still the same. So we can bring these things into our everyday lives. But we need to remember that this still has to be fun, especially at home, especially if you want to encourage enthusiastic readers. This has to be fun activities. So this is a shorter list of ideas, but something that I do with almost all of my kids, it's just blending sounds together, but if you call it a game, like guess my word, it turns into a game and could be fun. So guess my word, so the word is cat, and the kid has to put that together and say cat. And you can do it with people's names, you can do it with what you see around you, but you want to put it at their level that they can blend. So that's a big memory activity because they have to be able to remember the three sounds in the right order, say them again, and put them together. So this is really working on that auditory memory. With more print awareness, okay, how many letter M's can you see at the mall? Or I spy 5 things that start with. So whether kids are able to, whether you're somewhere where there are letters, then you can do letters. If you're somewhere where there aren't, you can do it with letter sounds. And with letter formation, this is more OT world, but you can make letters with your noodles, make letters in the sand, make letters with Play-Doh. So bringing in lots of different activities that they can have fun with letters and not just practicing writing them over and over again. Okay. So for our kids that are showing signs of having dyslexia or trouble reading, they really do need systematic instruction on how to read. So most children pick up reading almost intrinsically. So they might need a bit of a push, but then they're able to infer lots of information, find the patterns, and then they are off to the races. For kids with dyslexia, they really need very, very systematic instruction. So phonics is decoding, and I think that there was a big shift in our education system to move away from phonics. So if you're talking to teachers, they might say, oh, we don't do that anymore. But I'm here to say that that's where the evidence is. So our kids that are having trouble really need to be working and learning the phonics of words and all that phonological awareness piece. So we can move from guess my word to adding letters. So we're systematically teaching the rules of reading. So they're harder to find, but you can ask librarians for decodable books, or in e-readers, you can actually filter and find decodable books that way. So decodable books are books that are at specific levels. So they might be short vowels, they might have magic E, they might have soft C. So that skill that you're teaching them, that pattern that you're teaching them, a book can be working on that pattern. So avoid leveled readers for these kids that are having challenges because there's too many sight words per page and there's too many different spelling and reading patterns. So there might be a book about a firefighter, and the word firefighter, you have to know about magic E, you have to know that IGH is, the GH is silent, but makes the I say I, and you need to be able to read a 4-syllable word. So a lot of these books, actually, you can pretty much figure out what they say based on the picture. So that's great visual inferencing skills, but it's not learning how to read. So decoding is very important, but if you're always focusing on your child being able to decode and read, it is really hard for these kids and it's not fun. So they're going to associate reading in books with hard work and not fun and adventures. So while it's crucial that they have this skill, if they really aren't picking it up, that's where I would recommend reaching out to a professional who are experts in teaching decoding. That can be teachers, tutors, speech pathologists. So that's where I would turn to get support because you want kids to love books and stories. So, and they want to be motivated to be able to do that and to put the work in to learn how to read and get through all that hard work. Okay, so book sharing, this is my biggest takeaway. So if you take anything away from this today, it's this, is book sharing strategies. So do we have to read all of the books? Oh, sorry, all the words in a book? The answer is no, we do not have to read all the books. So book sharing involves a number of strategies to make reading stories with your child richer and more engaging and bring it to their level. So we want to paraphrase the actual lines of the stories based on their comprehension level. So if they're older, we can read more of the dialogue and story elements that the author has written. So if you look at a Robert Munch book, there's sometimes full pages full of text. So they're funny stories, but are kids that have maybe some problems with auditory memory or difficulty with narrative skills, they're not going to be comprehending, they're going to get bored. One will lose them. So when we're younger, we can adapt them to have more simple sentences. So this doesn't mean we spend less time on each page because we're going to go beyond the words of the book. So we can spend more time interacting, engaging with our child. So we're going to enrich language and vocabulary. We can introduce new words to our child. So we can use synonyms that are more complex when we're kind of building things up and kind of making things exciting. A really important one is making predictions. So you can help them by pointing out things that are happening. Oh, do you see that? Look who's coming, like who's in the background, what do you think is going to happen? So we're building critical thinking and problem solving here. And by drawing their attention to those elements of the book, we can really, and then the picture, we can really help them with comprehension as well. So we want to highlight similarities and differences within the book, relate them to our own lives and background knowledge. So like, this is just like when you went to the dentist. Did your dentist have toys too? But they didn't have a fish tank. That's so cool. Okay, so now, so you can also grab their attention by changing names in the story, the location in the book to where maybe you live or where you went on vacation to relate them back to their own life so that it becomes maybe a little bit more interesting to the child. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples to show you how I use lots of these sessions. So here's an example on how I would expand this page and highlight information, make predictions. So this is a book called The Cow That Went Oink by Bernard Smith. So we can say, oh, look how sad Pig is. Oh no, she's crying and miserable. Cow wanted to make her friend happy. She had an idea to cheer her up. What do you think her idea was? So if your child doesn't come up with an answer, you can kind of walk them through it to help make them inference. The cow can oink and the pig can moo. Maybe cow will teach pig something. What could it be? So I've brought in some synonyms, I've brought in making predictions, I've brought in some looking at different elements and bringing the child into the reading experience. So here's a page from the book Hurry Up Franklin by Paulette Bourgeois and Brenda Clark. So it's a pretty long paragraph. And it's a great story, and lots of great books have really long passages that you might lose your kid on. So we can shorten the passage and highlight what they can see in the picture, but spend just as much time on the page. So Franklin wanted to play. Look, they're playing leapfrog. Hey, didn't you play leapfrog with your sister yesterday? They're having as much fun playing as you did. But it's time to go to Bear's party. Franklin's gonna be late. Who do you think is going to be faster? Franklin the turtle or Rabbit? Look at Rabbit jumping away. He's bounding to Bear's house, going so fast. Do you think Franklin is bounding and going fast like Rabbit? Do you think Franklin's going to make it to the party? What do you think is going to happen? So there, I even used some of the more abstract language from it, like bounding. That's probably a novel vocabulary word, but because I brought it into how he was rushing, how he was jumping and moving quickly, we can kind of help support them with the meaning of that word. And we can even ask them, what do you think bounded means? Look at Rabbit go. What do you think that means? Okay. So why is book sharing important? So studies have found mothers who use book sharing techniques use more complex language while reading to their kids. And more complex maternal language is a great predictor of greater reading success for children. So one of the reasons for this is it exposes children to more abstract concepts. So the concept of time, how they're feeling, and it can really support critical thinking acquisition. It's also more fun, and it can make reading a more enjoyable activity for everyone. Because if you're reading the same story over and over again, it might be fun to change things up a little bit. Okay, so this is a strategy that they talked about and I learned about in my the reading course that I did at University of Toronto a couple of years ago. So we want to keep reading fun and stress-free. So we can have kind of 3 piles of books at home when we go to the library, when we go to bookstores. So pile 1 are the books above their reading level, but at their comprehension level. So these are the books that we read to our children. So this could be when they're a bit older, the chapter books we read with them. This is when we can use a lot of our book sharing strategies with our kids. Pile 2 is often where we see kids get frustrated with reading because we might be pushing our kids to read the whole time in the whole book. So these are just slightly above their reading level, but that they're working towards. So these are books that they can read, but with your support. So we can read this with them, help them use their strategies, and give them support. So you can take turns reading. You can be reading and say, hey, I need your help with this word when you know a word that they can read and be successful at. And you can even read books with them that they can independently read together. We can read pile 3 books in pile 2. So pile 3 is where I'd really stick to those, when they're younger, to those decodable books or really familiar books that they have a pretty good grasp on or memorize. Because these are the books that are at their reading level that they can successfully and confidently read alone. So in this way, you can kind of be like, hey, why don't you pick one of your books you can read by yourself? Or, hey, what books do you want to read together? So that they can be more confident with their reading. So if your child doesn't feel like reading, it's okay to read them the simple books that they could read independently. So you can ask them out, you can change the story and see if they notice, and it's okay to be reading them pile 3 books. Because we really want, as I said, keep reading fun and stress-free. Okay. So we're getting close here. There's a lot of different types of literacy media, and we can get kids interested in a lot of different sources. So we really want to focus on books that they're interested in. So if they pick a really long, wordy book, but it's about sharks, that's when our book sharing and paraphrasing skills can really come in there. So you can make outings out of getting books. So going to the library, going to a book fair can be a time that build the excitement around and build it into your routine. So use books without words. So these are often books that we think of as for really little kids, but it can lead to more book sharing and abstract and complex language. And if you want, you can get them to make up the story and write it on Post-it notes, so then they become the author of the book. And you can change it because it's a Post-it note. So find different types of books at the library, in stores, so nonfiction, fiction, and graphic novels. And I underline and bolded graphic novels because graphic novels are really wonderful and great. They often have fewer words per page, and they rely more heavily on inferencing from the pictures. So they can be a really great link between reading really simple, very young reader books and chapter books. So some series even have books associated with them. So there's a comic book or a graphic novel and a chapter book, so that it can be a really great stepping stone because they're already familiar with the story. So then it's a nice step up. And they also look more age appropriate. For our older kids that are maybe in grades 3 or 4 and are really struggling, it can be, oh, I don't want to read a baby book. So graphic novels can be a really nice step that makes them look like they're reading a more age appropriate book. I also really recommend listening to audiobooks because you want kids to love stories. You want them to love the idea of escaping and going on an adventure. So you can listen to these on long car rides while getting in the morning and use them instead of screen time. Okay, so I got through with 7 minutes for questions. I did it.
We're going to have a quick look and see if you have any questions that have come in from the audience. We do have a couple of questions that were sent in ahead of time, so let's start with those. Lauren? Our first question is, what should I be looking for when buying books?
Okay, so I think it's probably really good to look for books, especially for younger readers, that have a simple plot. So repetitive and rhyming books are really great for early readers because we want them to get involved and it's fun. But we really want kids 3, 4, 5 to start learning about story grammar elements, so characters, setting, plot markers, so that they're much better for practicing retelling the stories as well. So if it's just, here's a cat, here's a dog, it's not really great for working on telling stories. I kind of brought this up with wordless picture books because it forces you to make up the story and not rely on the words. So if you have those kind of hidden away or put in a box, I'd go grab those and make up some stories tomorrow. Probably past bedtime by now. But so they don't have to be for younger children.
That was great. Thank you, Lauren. So we have a question from our audience member right now, and the question is how to get your child to read novels every night before going to bed for grade 4 and grade 6 children. That's a great question.
So I would read them together. I would find a story that they're really interested in or a series that they're really interested in and start reading as a family and reading together. I know that when I was younger, my mom read with me almost every night, and as I got to be a better reader, I didn't want to wait, and I would start reading the story by myself. So I think that by having reading together, it can really, it can encourage enthusiasm for reading and can hopefully make them more interested. And that's really where it comes into like letting them pick what the book is, I think is really good.
I think that's a really good tip and a really important one. Let your child lead the types of books that they are interested in to help promote an interest in learning and learning to read and wanting to participate with the stories. Our next question is, my child can tell familiar stories back to me, but has a really hard time telling me personal stories. How do I work on this?
So kids are really kids often do much better with retelling stories if they have visuals. So if you've noticed, you go back through the book and have them retell the story. This can also help with their everyday as well. So try to get visuals from school or their favorite toys and activities, people, places, because that can kind of help them fill in their day and provide some structure for their retell. But I would also recommend trying to monitor how many specific questions that you're asking your child. So lean more towards general open-ended questions. So instead of, did you play with Susie today, you're just going to get a yes or no, or tell me about recess today. Instead, because it kind of gives them more allowance, and you can also take what they give you. You're like, great, that sounds wonderful. You can also practice this skill, like reminiscing. So retelling, you modeling it and retelling things that you did together in the past. So I would really strongly recommend paying special attention and really bringing up how they felt in those moments, because that often we have richer reminiscing skills when we bring in that emotional component. So remember how we went to the zoo yesterday? You were so excited to see the elephant, but the lion roared really loudly and it scared us. So we'll remember that better when we say we were excited or we were scared, and that those associated feelings can help. So I would recommend practicing that skill and doing it out loud with them and using visual support.
We have a couple more questions from the audience. Sorry. So they seem to go kind of part and parcel. And I think the first question is around how to get your children to read more complex books. Chapter books like Harry Potter, which are very complex, have a lot of words, there's a lot going on in there, not a lot of pictures for kids between the ages of kind of grade 4 and grade 6, and how to get your children to read aloud. So I think they probably go together around reading together as a family, and then also increasing the complexity of the books that your children read.
I might try getting some graphic novels, and because there's still lots of language and stories in them, and if they're picking what it is, they're going to be more motivated to read them. So if you even look at, there's just even looking at top graphic novels of 2016, 2017, or if you know what their friends are reading, or that can also help kind of gain traction with getting them to read novels. But I'm going to want my kids to read Harry Potter because I loved Harry Potter growing up, but if they're not interested in it, then it's going to be harder. So really finding, so yeah, I would try being like, okay, you know what, we're going to read together tonight, and really getting them into the story first, and maybe if they are more interested in it because they get hooked, then you might be able to get them to read aloud more often. And Harry Potter books are really long, so maybe getting into this kind of routine might be better with something that's a little bit shorter.
Especially for Harry Potter books too, they have them all on audiobooks. So I think that might be a nice way to scaffold, so we can read a chapter in person at night, the night before, and then let's do an audiobook part of it, the next chapter on the way in the car to school the next morning. And that way you're kind of going and giving them some back and forth. So a little bit you're giving to them, and a little bit you're working for. So you can scaffold the part that you're actually working on together, so they read a sentence, you read a sentence, and go back and forth. But get them really hooked on the plot during those times where you're doing the audiobook, to really keep them engaged. And that way they're going to run home and get excited about, okay, well, what happened in the next chapter? Because that was pretty exciting on my way to school this morning.
Or even like watching a movie. Lots of kids' movies have associated books with them. So you love this movie, why don't we read the book? And because often the book version is better. So I think really finding their interest is such a key component, because you really want them to want to read it. And if it's because it's hard and because reading out loud is a hard job, I would bridge that by either listening to an audiobook or reading with them.
They're great suggestions, Lauren. I think that we're out of time for this evening, so thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Lauren, for your fantastic presentation. Lauren has listed some reading resources here for your viewing pleasure. And here are the resources utilized for the presentation.
So why don't we leave this slide up if you want to, we can leave it up for a couple of minutes so that if there's anything that you do want to check out or take some notes on them, then you can, we'll leave this up for a little bit.
Absolutely, and please know that the presentation will be available on the Children's Support Solutions website in the next couple of days or so, so feel free to come back and listen to it again for Lauren's best hits. Have a wonderful evening.